So you will probably have seen by now that there was a shooting yesterday in northern Queensland in which 2 police officers and several members of the public, some of whom were the shooters apparently and one of whom was just a neighbour, were killed. After having looked at one of the shooters' online trails today, it became apparent to me that this person was, if not a sovereign citizen, labels are a bit hard to apply here, then definitely pilled in freeman style or soft-sit adjacent stuff, along with a hodgepodge of other conspiracist stuff. So I posted that to Twitter. So I thought I'd run through that and then kind of run through some of my previous work on soft sits, because I've done a lot of it this year. And one of the reasons I did so much of it this year was because it seemed to me that soft sits, just as they did in the US, were going to eventually start turning bloody. It seems like that's what's happened here. Police shot dead 3 people after an ambush at a remote property. This is in the north of Queensland. 2 men and 1 woman were fatally shot, but not before they killed 2 police officers and also the neighbour. The neighbouring property came over to find out what was happening, presumably because a fire was set. These people, in order to try and smoke out a 3rd police officer who was hiding in the bushes, lit a grass fire, which that combined with reports about their camo at the time, certainly had me and some of my comrades thinking, okay, who is this person, This is one of the gunmen, Gareth Train, who used to be a principal at various schools around the region. This is all sort of outlying around Cairns. Mark Latham apparently says that he had concerns over the education policy at the school. Read between the lines there. Actually, I can't at this stage. I don't know what concerns they are, but why would you go to Mark Latham about something? I've seen rumours online that, who knows whether this is true or not, about whether maybe the partner of one of them, the woman, the 3rd person, might have left their work to do with vax mandates and the like. Don't know, really. But certainly the 3rd one was Gareth Train. And it's Gareth Train that I pretty quickly found a lot of stuff related to conspiracist material online. First thing I found was this post on Cairns News, not to be confused, might I add, with Cairns Post, which is a real paper. No, this is Cooker material. This is a Queensland or Cairns-based Cooker site. So this is an article, November the 29th, 2021, a warning that counter-gangs, whatever the fuck that means, are active among freedom seekers. And it's written by Gareth Train. Notice it mentions Ricardo Bosi and Dave O'Neiggs at the start of it. What he's doing is he's slagging off conspiracist influences. Gareth gets into stuff that, and I've found a series of other comments from him. They're all very similar. How did we get here? Intelligence operation after intelligence operation, false flag after false flag, instilling fear into a retarded populace distracted by sports and beer to install totalitarian corporate Jesuit government muppets. Okay, paranoia about a Jesuit world order, or the Jesuits as being the people who run the NWO, that is very old school conspiracist material. The old warhorse cookers that far predate the pandemic tend to be like this. And as it became clear to me over time, this is definitely what Gareth Train is. He's an old school cooker, long before the word was ever applied to conspiracists, long before the pandemic. What he gets into here, as he does in many of his other comments, is commentary about how ASIO are run by Freemasons and Jesuits. He talks about the old good boy Masonic network here, about how Australians are stupid and they haven't woken up. Talks about vaccines here. And he says it's unlawful to name or identify an active Jesuit ASIO agent and will result in your disappearance into the bowels of the corrupt Jesuit judicial system, institutionalised as a number without a voice. Therefore, I suggest you look closer at the protest organisers, and they're obviously, given the heading, he's referring to people like Ricardo Bosi and David Neegs, and those leading the opposition before you were led straight off a cliff and you used as part of another false flag. So, Gareth believes that everything is false flag. He doesn't like the figureheads of the conspiracy movement, which is pretty common among them. You know, they're a paranoid lot anyway. You know, you can find a lot of people who, particularly the older school conspiracists, who became mistrustful, as they should have, of the sudden proliferation of schmick new figureheads that led to the pandemic. But, you know, his reason for doing so is that he thinks they're all controlled by the Jesuits. Funny story, actually, Ricardo Bosi has just posted through his Australia One Telegram channel that, you know, he thinks this is a contrived load of watch him all closely. Because, you know, it's the done conspiracist low energy thing to call everything a false flag when it involves a bit of violence, particularly violence that might, you know, tangentially make you look bad. The reason that's funny is because Gareth Train evidently also thought that Ricardo Bosi was a false flag. So it's like everyone thinks everyone's a false fucking flag. That's actually just pretty par for the course for conspiracist people, but I thought that was interesting. A lot of comments by Gareth online. Here he says the term conspiracy theory is a construct of the Jesuit order cabal, aka the CIA. And we commented a lot on Mike Holt's website. If you don't know who Mike Holt is, you probably, if you've seen all my soft set videos, you may recall him at the very least. An old school freeman / soft set warhorse, you know, obsessed with common law, which is a basic tenet of soft set freeman rhetoric. And here he is having a chat. So you know, a lot of comments under Mike Holt's Common Law website. Here he's talking about COVID detainment camps. He's getting a little bit stroppy that Mike Holt said to him that it's good to see you starting to do your own research. He's been aware of CCP troops in Canada for the past 20 years. This is an important thing in the sense that he's quite honest when he talks about 20 years. This is an old school conspiracist. He didn't just jump on board like most of the cookers that we've looked at deal with, you know, your sort of Ricardo Bosi, Dave O'Neill's types who didn't give a shit about politics much, well, particularly in the case of a lot of the influencers like Dave O'Neill's. You know, only when the pandemic happened. I mean, he's been a cooker for a long time is what I'm saying. He talks about Chinese troops having invaded many different countries in the West, classic conspiracist sort of idea at the moment. He says, as I previously stated, been there and done the research in the 90s. Nobody was interested then, and now the plans are coming true. Not many are interested now. But it seems like nothing has changed much in the past 25 years. Some people like to hear themselves talk. Some people want the stage. Some want the power. Some create websites, and I think he's having a sly little dig there at Mike Holt, and others write books. Me, I just tell people who want to listen what's going on. Good luck, Mike. Yeah, so he got a bit of a chip on his shoulder from what I could see about new school conspiracist influences, even though Mike's been around for fucking ages. He's not new school at all. You know, he is precious about the fact that he's been an old school awake person. The CIA, aka Jesuit cabal, invented the web to infiltrate, manipulate, and control. He is very big on the idea that the Jesuit-controlled ASIO and CIA are actually behaviour manipulating everyone, even mind controlling them. Here, in the context of an article, conspiracist article, about 5G, EMF waves and all that sort of thing, you know, altering your DNA, I think the article was about, on a conspiracy side. I think Top News, there's quite a bit of conversation by him under that, as well as Mike Holt's Common Law website. He's talking about the effects of EMF. He says, poor memory, concentration, headaches. Another deliberate effect, that is of, you know, 5G style EMF waves, not included in the list, is the voice of Allah, coded voice messages embedded in EMF waves. Long story short, he's really, really into mind control, as I said earlier. He really, really believes that the government is mind controlling citizens. Look, I've seen other comments from him bandied about. There's quite a few online. I won't go through them all. In which he was talking about, you know, building an ark, which In reality, he's making a fucking enclave on his country property, which soft-cits are wont to do. You may or may not be aware. But just before we move on, here's a line from him that I think is really prescient, and it sort of speaks to the anti-authority paranoia, but also to the latent intent to strike back if anyone comes to, pay a visit. Their murder and cover-up has never stopped, and neither has the false flags. If you're a conservative, anti-vax, freedom lover, protester, common law, which again, I take as code for soft-cit, it's probably a better, more apt description, freeman or common law, conspiracy talker, alternative news, independent critical thinker, truther, Christian, patriot, etc., etc. Expect a visit from these hammers. They are here to kill, maim, and take you to re-education school. Obviously doesn't bode well for anyone coming to knock on these people's door. So what we know about Nathaniel is that he went off the grid at some point after he lost his job, and presumably when he was communicating with Mark Latham in late 2021. He stayed in touch with his family, but he wasn't coming to see them per se. My assumption is at around that point he went to Gareth's house. I don't know, I'm on the outside looking in, but that seems the case to me. In October, however, we went completely off the grid, stopped communicating with them. On December the 4th, they filed a missing police report, and it only took them a handful of days to go to the property and for this shootout to happen. So I've actually had a really big year with soft-cits. Soft-cits themselves have had a big year. That's not for no reason that I would cover them so much. I could sense that they were going to start, unveiling the pointy end in a US-style way because, all conspiracy was supercharged by the pandemic. Beginning of the year, I did a big 2-part, 2-hour documentary looking at this Australian soft-cit ideology. You can't do that without sketching out where it comes from, which is, the US. But I looked into it. I talked to experts. I suppose most notably in this context, I spoke to Rob Sudi, who runs the website Freeman Delusion. We talked a bit the how hard it is. I at least alluded at the start that it's a little bit hard to pin a label on this person, Gareth Train, because you can't just say soft-cit. I mean, it's interesting when you speak to Rob, as you'll hear when you watch this video. Rob doesn't even like the term soft-cit. He doesn't like it. He doesn't think it's appropriate. He talks about people who peddle what he calls organised, pseudo-legal, commercial arguments. And you can also call them free men on the land. There's a whole bunch of different terms. We don't resolve the question of what goes on with someone as soon as we pin a label on them, though, do we? But it's actually quite a complex ideology, and it takes a long time to get into. Hence, 2-hour documentaries that I made. But I do think it's as good as it gets. If I do say so myself, in terms of an introduction into the soft-cit ideology in Australia, how it plays out. And this part 1, look, I think at about 43 minutes in, I had a look specifically at the tendency of soft-cits, of course in the US, but increasingly in Australia, to form enclaves. Clearly, what happened in North Queensland yesterday was that's what happened. An enclave had been formed, coppers came to pay a visit, and they showed the pointy end, tragically. I did this video, this is the second part of that 2-hour doco. And it was mostly looking at the clash between genuine sovereignty, which is very relevant if we're going to talk about soft-cit rhetoric in Australia, because we have a genuine sense of sovereignty here that is Indigenous sovereignty, the fact that Indigenous people, Indigenous cultures and ways of life were here first and for a very long time, and the battle to get, I suppose, colonial or settler Australia to accept that, and to, give land back, to talk about treaty and so on and so forth. So you've got that legitimate question, and then you've got the parasitic nature of conspiracist soft-cit rhetoric, which really has no basis in law or anything, and is parachuted in from US conspiracists. The clash between the two of them, and the parasitising that influences, whether they be Indigenous or not, have successfully carried out over the years on real Indigenous communities. That's really relevant here, actually, because the two brothers were Indigenous, we're finding out. And I just think it's typically reductive when you see Twitter comments, as I saw today, people going, oh, they're white. No, and then people responding going, no, actually, they're Indigenous, and then having that argument. I wish we'd get to the question of what an ideology that people who carry out attacks like this are beholden to, and what their history is there. For example, and I said this on Twitter earlier, the Christchurch shooter, Brenton Tarrant, he didn't just kill people in a mosque because he was white. Obviously, that's a prerequisite part of being a white supremacist, but he primarily did it because he is a white supremacist neo-Nazi. And you'll get the answers as to why he did what he did, as people did, by delving into the white supremacy and his immersion in neo-Nazi scenes. Similarly, you can understand what informs a freeman on the land style shooting or a cit style shooting by understanding not the fact that the shooter might have been Indigenous, but understanding freeman on the land and sovereign citizen and conspiracist ideologies and their immersion in them. Another pretty disturbing and typically US informed bit of extremism that cits got up to in Australia this year, this is back in May, was attempting to form a child abduction ring, something that they've done quite a bit in the US. Unfortunately, the wave of sort of cit rhetoric, paranoia and QAnon style pedophile fantasies that have overwhelmed the world since 2020. So there was ultimately unsuccessful. The child was returned, child abduction attempt, and that was definitely informed and aided and abetted by cits. So you can sort of see, if you look at that, if you look at the burning of Old Parliament House at the start of the year, and now if you look at what's happened here, you could see that cits in Australia have become supercharged. We all know what by. It's been by the pandemic. I only mean to refer to some of my previous work to get you having a look at it so that you understand what informs these ideologies and why they've sort of coalesced and come together and what they're about. Hopefully that helps make the conversation a bit more, informed. I say I've had frustrating conversations over the course of the day with people going, it's a neo-Nazi attack, or it's a far-right thing, or what have you. Well, labels aren't just labels. Us trying to understand something is not just about the act of saying, what's the correct name to pop on it? That's not like putting a genie in a bottle. It's not it, I wouldn't have done hours worth of content already on it this year if it were that simple. I'm not a time waster, I'm pretty fucking busy. I think that if we can familiarise ourselves with the actual ideologies as they relate to overseas and as they've actually been imported into Australia, then we're better positioned to, not just talk about them, but also sort of watch out for where they come from next. I'm not saying that, many of us were in a position to know, and maybe families were, I don't know, but maybe the rest of us weren't in a position to know that the Train brothers were going to be doing something this utterly drastic and violent, but I think we've had a big wake-up call in Australia just now, and I think we're, if we're not from now on aware that Australian cits can also turn really violent, well, no one's ever going to be in a position to be able to doubt that in the near future again, are they? Anyway, I'm going to put the links to these videos in my description. I'm going to stop talking there because I didn't want to record too long of a video. I just really wanted to encourage people to have a look at some of my previous content. So again, look in the description there. What a tragic, violent scenario, unbelievable. Not too surprising, but fucking shocking nonetheless, Patreon.com/Tom Tanaki if you appreciate my work. Cheers. See you next week.